gives them really powerful it gives them really powerful tools to manage their child's problematic behaviors and also to really enhance their relationship together. TFCBT is for children ages 3 to 18. They have to have a memory of the traumatic experience that they have been through. They are children who are experiencing PTSD symptoms, who may have elevated levels of depression, anxiety, or shame. And the caregiver does participate in some conjoint sessions. TFCBT follows, they use the acronym PRACTICE. So they address psychoeducation, they talk about relaxation techniques, emotional regulation, cognitive coping skills, trauma narration, and processing. So I would say if you're looking at this array of services and trying to decide between them, CPP and TFCBT are really intended to address trauma head on. So they are interventions where you're going to be really processing through the trauma itself. ABC is a little more around building up parenting skills and resiliency with the caregiver. PCIT is addressing the problematic behaviors. These are all trauma-informed interventions, but they vary in terms of how directly they're going to be addressing a traumatic experience. So for CPP and TFCBT, there needs to have been a trauma. For ABC and PCIT, there does not have to have been a trauma. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding as to the differences of those.
Thank you, Mary Catherine. So as an organization, as a funder, we had this opportunity to invest and to support Families First, Families First Act. And the backdrop of this is, next slide, please. For many years, since 2007, our community has been convening what we call Z5, which is an informal, voluntary, collaborative of providers and stakeholders concerned with the social and emotional health of children 0 to 5. And Z5's work has, over the years, has brought, the mentor-mentee initiative. We've built the capacity of caseworkers and YFS. We also developed a certificate at UNC Charlotte for practitioners and early infant mental health. So we've had this group of folks who really care about this issue meeting for years voluntarily. And for years, we've talked about these high quality evidence-based therapeutic interventions. And so when we hear that North Carolina has this great list that we can bring to scale in our communities, we were very excited. And we had already been talking about this. So we already had some champions in our community who understood why we would make this investment and why it was important. So next slide. So that led to what we like to call change effort number 1. And so we thought, how can we invest in this change? And we know that PCIT is, the evidence-based model that we wanted to pursue. We were asked by DSS to fund Department of Social Services in our county, excuse me, I don't want to use too many acronyms, to fund the training of 2 PCIT therapists that were embedded in the community. And this was a new activity for our partnership to fund 2 years ago. And it was a great success. And we understood the need was great. We understand that PCIT training is expensive. It takes a year to become trained in this therapy. So we decided to figure out how can we expand this work? What can we do? And that led to what we like to call change effort number 2, which is essentially our partnership as a systems change effort, funding the training for a cohort of 12 therapists in PCIT. And so we started them in January. They were selected. So it's a year-long training. And Elizabeth, make sure I have this right. I apologize, I may not have the number right. But so we are offering this training for free, and in return, the therapist offers to provide services to Medicaid eligible families for up to 3 years. So that's our systems change work, and a way for us to support the shift towards preventative services for families. And I will hand it off. Next slide. I'll hand it off to Darden.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about PCIT, parent-child interaction therapy. Thanks, Jennifer. And yes, we are in process right now of working with this group of trainees from Mecklenburg. They've finished their first face-to-face training, and they are seeing cases right now while under consultation with our training staff. So I just think this little meme is a little bit funny. Our little PCITers are usually the kids that are, destroying classrooms and messing up your lobby and things like that. So I just think it's kind of funny to think about these little guys that are going to terrorize your little house like a tornado. Next slide. But they're cute while they're doing it sometimes. So PCIT has been alluded to several times here, so I won't belabor it, but PCIT has so many accolades. It's been researched heavily since the 1970s. There are many published research articles and studies that have proven its effectiveness. And so the most notable and most recent accolade is the Family First Prevention Services Act. PCIT was named one of the first evidence-based treatments for little kids through that act. Next slide. So what is PCIT? So I'm just going to give some broad brush overstrokes of what PCIT is. I'm a PCIT trainer and I love PCIT. I live and breathe it. So I'm happy to talk more about it with anybody who's interested. But essentially PCIT has two parts. The first part of the model is about attachment and building relationships and teaching caregivers skills, positive skills, to be able to manage those behaviors that they're seeing. So it's called child-directed interaction. We also use a ton of acronyms, so we call it CDI. And we're really trying to, through this process of teaching these caregivers positive skills, we're trying to increase the kids seeking positive attention and the caregivers giving positive attention, thereby decreasing that negative attention-seeking behavior that most of our little guys are looking for. As we know, kids will seek out any kind of attention they can possibly get. And so negative attention is better than no attention at all. And so sometimes we see that that's what's behind a lot of these behaviors. So we're teaching caregivers to really increase how much positive attention they're giving to those positive behaviors that they're seeing. The second part of the model, we are focused on consistent limit setting. The second part of the model goes second for a reason. We've done a lot of research about how the order of PCIT, and we think it's really important to build those relationships, have that attachment, be really solid before we move on to thinking more specifically about limit setting. We want kids to want to please their caregivers. Basically everything in PCIT functions around attention in some way, shape, or form. And so in the second half of the model, parent-directed interaction, or PDI, we are really helping caregivers learn how to be consistent, predictable, and to follow through with whatever it is that they're saying. And all of this is done in a really safe, trauma-informed way. Next slide. There are many outcomes of PCIT, but here are some that people typically ask about relative to these settings. And we know that they increase positive caregiver and child interactions and attachment and relationships. They also improve frustration tolerance and emotion regulation. So we're helping kids find their own ways to emotionally regulate, and then we are capitalizing on that and praising them for it and helping them be able to do that outside of the setting that we're in, which would be the clinical setting. We also see that the PCIT improvements generalize across domains, meaning that their behaviors improve, their regulation, their frustration tolerance, all of those things are still shown to be effective in school settings or community settings or anywhere else that the kids are located. We also oftentimes advertise it as like a 2 or 3 for 1 special, meaning that the kids that we have coming into our office who are the target of the treatment are not the only ones who are benefiting from this intervention and from what we're doing, because we're having the caregivers generalize it across all of the children in their home. And so we're seeing that all siblings increase all of these same skills that we're teaching the target child. One of the really cool things that comes from this is improved attention. So those kiddos, and we know little kids all need a little bit more help with attention anyway, but their attention and ability to stay engaged in a task for longer really helps. We've got a lot of good studies now that PCIT is one of the best ways to treat ADHD in young children. It actually has better results than ADHD medications for little kids. It also helps to improve maternal depression. We've done some studies that show us that over time, just through doing PCIT, even if we aren't targeting that depression in particular, that it improves. And we know that it reduces caregiver stress and obviously those negative behaviors. That's sort of the hallmark of what PCIT, people think of PCIT. Next slide. So what makes PCIT different from some of those other models that Mary Catherine talked about, or other parenting models or behavior models that people are familiar with? PCIT really does have an emphasis on caregiver-child interaction patterns. And so we are really doing systems change within the family system. We're not just treating this child in a one-to-one situation. We're giving the tools to the caregivers to be able to do this independent of us in any scenario that they find themselves in. So we're helping to increase their competency and their comfort level and their feelings of confidence around parenting, and that they can manage their child and they can have a positive and healthy relationship. So we're really changing the systems of the family by giving them these tools and confidence. PCIT is one of the most assessment-driven models that I know of. We are really doing all kinds of data gathering for every single session, but it's not just numbers. We're using that every single moment of every single session, and we're really transparent with families about what that data is, what it says, and why we're using it, and how we're using it. And they're part of the process. It's a criteria-based model. So, when Mary Catherine was talking about ABC, it's 10 sessions. That's not how PCIT works. PCIT is something that we are working on getting caregivers to certain criteria so that they can feel that confidence and competence in what they need to know for parenting their child. And so we're working with them until they reach the required criteria. And the criteria is the criteria that we have because of research. It's not an arbitrary number. We have that because of what the research tells us needs to happen in order to maintain these gains over time for these families. We do have some really great research articles that talk about people who have completed treatment successfully. They maintain gains for at least 7 years post-treatment, which is a really long time in the research world. We have no reason to believe it diminishes after that. It's just really hard to track people for that long. And in PCIT, we are treating the caregiver and child together in treatment, and we're doing live coaching of the skills. So we really, as clinicians in PCIT, are not directly interfacing with that child, hardly at all. We're in the room with them sometimes. We might have little off conversations with them or be using our PCIT skills to model for those caregivers, but I am not doing one-on-one therapy with that kid. My sole purpose of being in that room is to help the caregivers learn how to use the skills that we know that they need to use specifically for the purpose of shaping their child's behavior and being able to manage it without me. And I am talking to them and coaching them right there in the moment while they're dealing with their kids. It's pretty cool. It's very fun. Next slide. So in terms of who is appropriate for PCIT, this is a great slide to help you kind of know the specific inclusion criteria. The next one we'll talk about exclusion criteria. They're fairly mirror image of one another. But in terms of the clinical concerns, like I said before, the kind of quintessential kid that we think of for PCIT is that kid who's really externalizing behaviors, is getting kicked out of daycares, is having a hard time. Maybe the caregivers can't find anybody to watch them, but that's not exactly the only kid that is appropriate for PCIT. Those definitely are kids we see, but we also see kids who are a little bit more internalizing of their symptoms. They might have some mood disorders or those ADHD behaviors like we talked about earlier, but also those kids and families who are having some troubles with relationships and attachment with their primary caregiver. Sometimes it might be because they've moved to a foster home. Sometimes it's because they're going back to a biological parent. There's all kinds of reasons that we might decide that PCIT is a good fit for a family. As I mentioned, it is trauma informed, and Mary Catherine said that it does not treat trauma, which is absolutely true. But what we do see is that it works for kids who have trauma in terms of helping them with their relationship with a primary attachment figure, and therefore potentially making them better suited for the trauma work at a future point. And it can help alleviate some of those symptoms in the meantime. PCIT is for kids between 2 and 7. They need to have receptive language skills about 24 months of age or better. And the reason for that is because how PCIT functions is that it relies on the idea of attention. And so kids need to understand cause and effect. So if I'm getting attention for this reason, it's because of this. And if I'm not getting attention, it's because of this. So they kind of need to have enough development, cognitive development and language development to understand like the concept of kind of, if I put my hand on a hot stove, it's going to burn me. That's an easy way to think about what that if then is. And families need to be able to participate regularly in scheduled treatment sessions. It builds over time. And so you really need to have them be there consistently, and they need to be able to practice consistently with their kiddo. And so having that regular client contact between the client and the caregiver is really important outside of sessions as well, because they have to be able to implement these skills. The primary caregiver also obviously needs to be able to participate regularly and have that contact with the client consistently. Thank you, Mary Catherine, for answering that question. Next slide. All right, so as I mentioned, the exclusion criteria is kind of the opposite of the inclusion. So those receptive language skills for the kids, if they're too low, is probably not going to be a good fit. If they can't participate regularly, then that's probably not going to be a great fit. In terms of those caregivers, we're not going to treat perpetrators of sexual abuse. Essentially, our skills that we're teaching in CDI would be great grooming skills, and so we don't want to enhance those in any way. And then, if there's active DV or physical abuse or psychological abuse happening, we're going to triage them to get the help that they need first before we bring them to PCIT land. And if they're actively psychotic or have some other thought disordered issues or very cognitively impaired, PCIT may not be a good match for them. We use a bug in the ear device. And so if you're already hearing voices, having that happen is not typically going to be helpful to your disorder. And because it's a sort of a cognitive-based model, if people are too delayed, then they're not going to be able to understand the model. But it can work really, really well with those sort of borderline cognitive functioning adults, because it's very prescribed and very specific and very repetitive. That can be a really nice fit for those caregivers who are struggling in some ways. All right, next slide. Okay, so now you know a little bit about what the nuts and bolts of PCIT are. If you have other questions about it, feel free to put it in the chat and we can talk about it at the end of this presentation, or maybe even answer it in the chat. But I'm going to move on a little bit to the other side of our training platform that's a bit unique from most training platforms, but also we find very, very important. So I work for the North Carolina Child Treatment Program, and we've been training in evidence-based treatment models. We currently train in 5 different models, but we've been training in these models for more than 10 years now. And when we started, we were just training the model, which was great, and kids and families were benefiting from it. But we were noticing that it was really tough for agencies to keep and maintain clinicians to be able to continue to provide these services, or clinicians were struggling to even finish training to be able to provide these services. And so we decided that something more needed to happen. We weren't sure what at the time, but the field of implementation science and sustainability planning has sort of been developing over the last years as well. It's a relatively new field, but so we decided that that was what we needed to do to help try to better embed and better maintain the training that we were doing across North Carolina. So for those of you who are not familiar with these terms, just thought I would start by kind of talking about what exactly they are. So implementation science, you can see the scientific definitions here too, but I'm just going to kind of talk about what it means to us. So implementation science is really what practitioners and organizations or agencies need in order to maintain new EBT practices, or really any practices, and how they can make it realistic and possible to keep it going in their agency. In terms of sustainability, so the implementation is really focused on getting the training in, like getting it started, having the service where clinicians or practitioners are learning what it is to do that model. Sustainability planning is sort of the long-term version of that. So, okay, we know it. Now, what are we going to do to make sure that it stays here? How are we going to keep being able to provide PCIT, in our case, in our agency or organization for a long time to come? We don't want people to just do it for the year that they're in training with us. We'd love to hear 10 years from now that you're still doing PCIT and that your program is even bigger and stronger than it once was. So that's kind of the idea behind the implementation and sustainability planning that we implemented in our training track. Next slide. In order to do this, we have a thing called the senior leader training track. So we run the clinical training as normal, as we've always done it. Well, we've updated it a lot over the years, but the clinical training happens and it runs, and the clinicians are the people who are learning the model. But on the other side of that, to help with the implementation and sustainability, we decided that we needed to have additional buy-in and additional supports from the agency side, not just the clinician who is really excited about this model, but we wanted to know that they had the backing and support of their agency. And so we started engaging with the agency administrators at these locations. And we're working with them to kind of do all the back end stuff while their clinician can solely focus on learning the clinical implementation of PCIT. And so we want to help agency administrators develop strategies to support their ability to effectively implement and or in the future expand their PCIT program. And so we talk about in training, we talk about things like what are the barriers that we see happening in agencies? What are things that you're going to come up against, and how are we going to remedy that, or how are we going to jump that hurdle? So we're giving them information and knowledge about what implementation science is and does, and what we know about how to mitigate those barriers. We're going to help them decide what data is important for them to collect to be able to say, hey, funders, this really is a thing we need your help with, or yeah, administrators, we should keep doing this thing because look at these outcomes. Whatever the data need is for that particular organization, we're helping them figure out what the data is and then how to use it. They're also given plenty of activities and assignments. So we're helping them know what the things are that they need to do, such as maybe like writing their roadmap of what happens with referrals when they come in the door and why they are or are not getting to the right places. And so they're taking these activities back to their agencies and working with their groups, their championship groups, so to speak, of people across their agency who are supportive and who come into contact in some way, shape, or form with what's happening with their cases for PCIT. And they complete these assignments and they bring them back to us, and we're talking about what's going on with them. And our senior leaders also participate in consultation with our faculty throughout the training year as well. Senior leaders are typically agency administrators who are either upper level supervisors or executive directors or people of the like, but they need to have the authority to make key decisions and maybe even changes that would significantly improve the successful implementation of PCIT within their agency. And those can vary from like time allocations for particular clinicians to just getting referrals to them, et cetera, whatever the need is that we're seeing. Next slide. So to make it a little less, trainer talk and a little bit more real life, you can one of my coworkers actually came up with this analogy. And so you can think that senior leaders are gardening really beautiful flowers, and the flowers represent the clinicians in this case. And sometimes people don't fully appreciate or even notice the gardener. But as soon as the gardener stops doing their job, the weeds take over, the flowers might die, and that's what people then notice. And that's the equivalent of losing clients or losing clinicians, right? But it takes daily tending to maintain a really beautiful garden. And even the most beautiful gardens sometimes are gone in a season if we're not really paying attention to it. And it's much easier to maintain something when you've started it with lots of good attention and soil and hardy plants and deep roots. But even those well-established plants need tending. And you can kind of think of clinicians and EBTs or any model that you have in your agency with this same philosophy. So it's great to have clinicians who are wanting to do these things, but we know things happen. And if we really need that supervisory and agency administration support to foster and grow and keep the soil fertile for these clinicians to do the work. Next slide. So I think I'm turning this over now, but I think first we might let Mary Catherine talk a little bit about her experience with us. Mary Catherine has come through our training program, both as a clinician and a senior leader. And so we thought we'd let her talk a little bit about her experiences in those as well. So maybe you'll go back to the last slide.
You can go back so we can look at the pretty flowers while I talk if you want. And there was a question in the chat. I was going to start typing, but wanted to be ready to unmute. So Darden will answer that question. But so as Darden mentioned, I came through first as a clinician. When I was trained, I was actually a contractor at my agency, which is pretty unusual for an agency to invest this amount of money into a contractor to be trained. And my senior leader was definitely a higher level agency leader. And during the time that I was in training, he was actually promoted. And so I lost him partway through. He wasn't able to continue on as our senior leader. And so there were 3 of us in training together, and we kind of led ourselves through the model as clinicians. And so I think that gave me a really kind of unique insight as to the importance of the senior leader role, because I experienced what it was like not to have it. And so I think that deepened my commitment to giving the clinicians that I've been a senior leader for a really holistic and powerful approach to supporting them through the model. So I think about this as PCIT is an intervention. It's a therapeutic intervention. But what we as senior leaders are able to do is turn an intervention into a program. That's what I see my goal as the senior leader as being. So it's not just a type of therapy that we offer, but it's really a program that we have built around certain outcomes that we're looking for. We have our own specific PCIT case note in our electronic health record. We track that data outside of our other, programs. So we have an early childhood mental health program, and that data gets tracked, but PCIT gets tracked separately. So I think a lot of what we do as senior leaders is educate those within our agency about how something can be both an intervention and a program in its own right. And I've worked with agencies, who have been going through as senior leaders at the same time as me. I work for a really large community mental health agency. We have almost 400 employees. We're across 3 different states. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, a private practice where maybe you have one clinician being trained and then the practice administrator is the senior leader and it's really small. And so what this approach, this implementation science senior leader track approach helps with is making sure that the smaller agencies aren't getting really overwhelmed by the expansiveness of PCIT, and that the really large agencies aren't allowing it to get lost in the shuffle. So it gives someone within those settings the tools to really be a champion for growing the intervention into a program. I think the other piece of it too, and having tried to do this as a clinician, and really a contractor has literally no power in an agency. So I was trying to do this with a lot of barriers in front of me, but to be able to think strategically about how to roll out an evidence-based practice is really important as well. So you might be an entity that's bringing in your first EBP, or you might be one that has a range of different EBPs. But what we've been able to do over the years, as we've really focused on growing PCIT, is we've expanded and kind of generalized those senior leader skills to all of our array of services, so that we now have an evidence-based practice application process, so that we can discern which of our clinicians are going to be a good fit for which EBP. What are they interested in? We have them write a little essay about how it's going to impact their clinical practice. We have information sessions, so that if we have someone in the agency who's already trained in that EBP, they're able to really talk to the clinicians about what is this going to look like for you to go through this training, because they're long. PCIT is 13 months. TFCBT is probably about the same amount of time, but I'm a backup senior leader right now for our TFCBT cohort, and it's quite intense. So there's a lot that the clinicians are taking on. With PCIT, we talk about how they're really learning another language because of the coding that, Darden was talking about, the skill acquisition, that they have to, meet certain criteria to advance to the next stage. And the way that we measure that is by coding. And that's really learning a whole nother language. And so, so we have these information sessions so that they can go into it with their eyes wide open. And that speaks to that retention and engagement for those clinicians, so that we don't lose them partway through training because nobody told them how hard it was going to be. Now, we don't try to scare them away, but we just try to make sure that they understand what this is going to look like in their day-to-day as they're balancing their current caseload, and talking, strategically with them about how we can help them to balance caseload so that they have time to fulfill their training obligations. And then that kind of leads into another part of the strategic thinking, which is really looking at the true cost of an EBP. And we've participated in some different research studies about fiscal mapping tools. The Center for Child and Family Health has a fiscal mapping tool that they're developing as well, or have already developed somewhere in that process, to really help agencies think about, it's not just the tuition money that you pay for the training and the staff time, it's actually all the other costs that go into it. So with PCIT, there's a lot of equipment, and that's why the Smart Start partnership was so incredible for these Mecklenburg County clinicians, because the technology is expensive. There's also, the consultation time that they have to be present for. They have to make those calls a couple of times a month. And so that might take away from their ability to hit their productivity numbers. So there are other costs attached to an evidence-based model, and some of these tools help us to really see that bigger picture. So, other things that we talk about in the senior leader track, of course, are things like, how do we get referrals? Who should we connect to? What partners are really good referral sources? We really learn a lot from each other too. And I think that planted the seed for what Elizabeth and I are going to talk about a little bit later, which is just really the peer support and hearing what other people are going through. Who are they connecting with? What have they found to be really good referral sources? And then talking through the intake and screening process. How are we marketing this? And how are we supporting the clinicians through the training? And so for me, because I've now been in the senior leader track for a few years, I've done a lot of that kind of groundwork. And so I've really shifted my focus to, and especially in the times that we're in, and everybody, I know all of you know about the turnover that is happening at a rapid rate, especially in community mental health. So I've really turned a lot of my attention and focus to the support piece of this, supporting those clinicians as they go through it, listening to them talk about how overwhelming it is, giving them some strategies and tools about how they can balance it, giving them permission to drop a client, to discharge a client so that they can make some space on their caseload and in their week to really do this well. Because the last thing I want is for my agency to make an investment in someone and for them to drop out because I didn't protect their time. I didn't help them to balance their work responsibilities with the training responsibilities. So that's what I've really turned my focus to recently. I think that it is so special that this senior leader piece is part of the experience, because I think that often there's a little bit of a disconnect as we move further away from the direct practice. For those of us who were clinicians and have moved into supervision, sometimes, we forget a little bit what that grind is like. And so the senior leader focus allows us to kind of be that bridge and to really, be the support partner for the clinicians who are in training. So I could talk about it all day, obviously, but I will allow us to move on. Thank you for letting me share a little bit of that.
And I just want to highlight real quickly before we move the fact that this kind of implementation science lens does not happen in all states. That this is something, the senior leader track is something that the trainers here in North Carolina, Darden and her team, developed. And so you can see how that's a value add. I will also give a huge shout out to Mary Catherine, because implementation science it works if it's well implemented. And what you just heard described is a supervisor who takes her job seriously and who wants her people to succeed. So, that we have to have all of the pieces working together in order for things to really work well. And so I can't not highlight that. So, all right, let me get my slides to, there we go. So, in terms of what we really found in Mecklenburg, in spite of the fact that there is the senior leader track, what we found in Mecklenburg was that, there's a high bar for folks to decide on their own that they want to receive this training. The training was being offered out of our community. It required a 2-hour drive to go to Duke, to Darden, in person to be able to do the training prior to COVID. And so it was expensive, it was time consuming, it was a challenge to learn. So there were a lot of reasons to not do the training. And so what we found over the years was somebody would get rostered, is what it's called, and about that same time, somebody who was rostered would either move into a supervision role, or they would decide that they were gonna no longer accept Medicaid or insurance, or just stop serving altogether, or move out of the community. And when you have 80,000 children, it felt like we were never going to get ahead, that we were playing this sort of game of whack-a-mole, even with trying to incentivize our partners to apply for funding. And so we really stepped back to examine what it is that we were trying to change, and then how could we get people to change, because it's very expensive to buy a clinician's time for a year and pay for the training and the equipment. That made it a very costly investment. And so we really, wanted to figure out if there was a way that we could do it differently, and get more people interested in it. And so the tool that is helpful when you're looking at any behavior change is the COM-B. And the COM-B is very it's very practical. It's not anything, it sounds very glamorous, but really it's just a compilation of all that we know about behavior change, how behavior change happens in human beings. And we know that it's a combination of your capability. And that's your physical capability, your psychological capability. It's the opportunity, whether you feel like you have the opportunity to be able to do that, and that's money and access and all of those things. Oh, look, I've got my little, forgot about that. And then motivation. And it's interesting that in so many of our change efforts with individuals, we really focus on knowledge and skills and abilities, and we spend less time thinking about motivation. And yet, if you'll look, you'll see motivation is really so critical. There's so much that goes into motivation, both our conscious, the things that are within our control, but also those subconscious, those unconscious motivating factors, things like optimism and pessimism and how you're wired and that sort of thing. So what we thought we would do is I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute and then share again. Let me get this. We're gonna ask you guys to do a little thought experiment exercise. And so I've created a Jamboard. And I'm gonna share that with you again so you can see it. And I think Jessica's gonna drop the link in the chat so that this is just what we were looking at. It's the same thing that we were just looking at. And so what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to divide you up into some breakout rooms. And we would love for you to given what you've learned about Mecklenburg and PCIT and all of that, if you could spend about 10 minutes just talking through, based on what you've learned and this model of the COM-B, how you would approach it. How would you approach trying to solve the problem of getting more clinicians in your community? And so would love for you to spend a few minutes just discussing that together. If that's not your jam and you've got some big problem that you are just really focused on right now, something that's really weighing heavy on your heart and you want to talk about that, that's fine. We just really want to invite you to engage with this and really think about and reflect on the fact that, there's more than just knowledge that needs to go into any intervention that you're trying to undertake. And so without further ado, I'm going to be quiet and let Jessica do her thing to let you all go into breakout rooms.
All right, many of you are getting an invitation right now to enter a breakout room. So please let me know if you have any questions about doing so. There's going to be about 3 to 5 of you in each room. So I'll be making sure that no one is alone, or if a group is too small, I may move you into another room to make sure that the correct number of people is in a room for a good conversation. For those of you who just entered the room, we are just starting breakout, so I'm going to assign you to a room.
I'll be right back, y'all.
Hello.
If you're just entering this room, we're just starting breakouts. And so folks are just moving into breakout rooms now. So
No,
that
I'm not just entering. I've been in for a while. I'm actually driving and I'm not able to engage in the breakout room. I just wanted to make that known. But I'm here, I'm listening. I just can't participate in all of that while I'm driving.
okay, well, thank you for
Sure.
letting.
Yes, and I'm enjoying your presentation. Thank you so much. I'll put it back on mute and just wait for everybody to come back.
Thanks, Angela.
Thanks.
Hi, Robin. I see your chat. Are you having trouble with a room?
Uh-oh,
It's
the
not
room's not
working.
working.
Hi, Robin. I'm going to try to find you and send you a new request.
Thanks, Jessica.
I told Jessica that we would probably need to shorten it to more like 7 minutes. Yeah, okay.
That makes sense.
All right, Robin, a new request has been sent to you. Please let me know if you get it. For anyone else that's still here in the main room, if you're trying to get to a breakout and you'd like to be in a breakout, please just pop your name in just make a message in the chat and I'll make sure you can get to a room for conversation.
Jordan, thank you for monitoring the chat. That not having 2 monitors really messed me up because I couldn't keep the chat open. So
I know it gets tough when you do that sometimes. I have learned that there's like these little if you're in the presentation view, like where you started, under the box, there's like a circle with 3 dots in it. And you can click that and it gives you different options. And so you can tell it you don't want like the presenter view or whatever, and then it'll just do one of your screens. But that felt like a lot to explain when we were like just about to start. So sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. And I know that sometimes it's like it's PowerPoint too, and like it just
I know. Those were the reasons I opted to just be like, hey, we're just gonna move forward.
yeah. No, I appreciate it very much.
Of course. I think Mary Catherine went to her room.
Oh, nice. She's so amazing.
I know. We would love to clone her.
I know.
I saw a lot of names that I recognized. So that was fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
I can't believe everybody doesn't do the senior leader track.
I know.
that offers training. It's seems like setting people up for failure in some ways.
There's a lot of conversation about it in the PCIT International community now. But part of it is it's expensive to train, like you have to essentially have double the staff.
Yeah.
And then
No, I get it. I get I mean, it is a high bar to ask people to clear, but it's the classic short-term versus long-term thinkers, right? And when we think short-term, we don't set ourselves up for long-term success.
Yep. Crazy. A lot of agencies also just don't want to buy into it. They just want to send their people, get it done, and be done with it. They don't want to have to be part of it.
Right.
Make the analogy a lot like, well, PCIT can't work when you just send the kids. Like, you have to have the caregivers. And very similar in training.
Right.
That's part of that contract that I'm doing now. Is the state of Florida engaged in a contract with PCIT International to roll out PCIT in Florida, and they brought me on to do the implementation side. So it's like
cool.
a soiree into that in the PCIT International community at large. So we'll see.
Isn't that where you're from?
No, I'm actually from here, but I lived in Florida for a while, so I have a Florida number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I grew up in Chapel Hill. So.
Just a heads up that I'm about to end breakouts. So folks will be coming in within the next 60 seconds.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks. All right, let's see if I can share my screen again. I don't want to mess up anything.
It is being recorded.
Jessica, will you let me know when everybody's back?
Great. It looks like everyone is back.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So thank everybody for being good sports and trying to, just spend a few minutes engaging with this, talking about it, trying it on for size. We're now going to spend just a little bit of time going over sort of what our process looked like. And then, the goal is to leave some time for questions as well. So we'll see if we can meet our goal in the time that remains. For us, we really, we spent a good bit of time, I would say. Darden and I started talking about what might be possible probably a year ago. And whether there would be even willingness, because certainly the first barrier that we identified was geographic. Asking people to travel to Raleigh to do the training felt like we were creating a barrier with opportunity, and wanted to see if we could remove that barrier. And so reached out to Darden and said, hey, if we got, what would it take to bring you guys to Charlotte to do this training? Is that possible? And Darden was very flexible and said, yes, we would like nothing more than to do a cohort in your locality. What's a cohort? A cohort is 12. And so, you know, just starting to sort of put together the practicalities of what that might look like. And then thinking about, you know, well, what would we need to offer to be able to make this attractive enough that clinicians would be willing, or agencies would be willing to invest their the resources of their time to make this possible. And so, again, thinking about those, that opportunity piece with money, as if we were able to find the funds to pay for the actual training, and then to provide the supplies that were required and the technology that's required to provide the therapy. And so while all of this was going on, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. You know, thinking about how we wanted all of this to work, we knew right away that we needed folks who had more direct contact with and direct experience with PCIT. And so we were very fortunate. As Jennifer said, we have this longstanding resource called Z5 in our community that allowed us to be connected to clinicians in our community, to supervisors in our community. And so we were able to put together a steering committee. And Mary Catherine, are you here? I don't see you.
I'm here.
Okay, good. She was one of our steering committee members, and we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about what that's about. She's going to be able to really explain that a little bit further. That we recognized that we really needed to make a concerted effort to advertise this opportunity, and that meant really tapping into that task force to really help us with that effort, because you know, Darden and her team had advertised in years past. They certainly you know, had all of the lists and could send e-blasts and emails and do social media posts, and yet they had never really been able to get a whole cohort of folks together in the past. And so so that was, you know, using that information to really inform our efforts. We knew we wanted to offer information sessions because, again, as you heard, it's a complex model. There's a lot that goes into it, and we wanted folks to really be able to come out and kick the tires. And again, something that Darden and her team always offer, and yet very few folks take them up on it. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were putting in the effort to get, you know, butts in seats, as the phrase goes, to be able to learn what this was all about. And then, you know, making sure that that there was good leadership support, and that the support that we offered was trauma informed. And that's something that I'm going to let Mary Catherine talk a little bit more about as well.
You ready for me?
I am.
Okay. Yeah, so as Elizabeth mentioned, we feel like this steering committee of teammates that we had was really critical to the success of this. And we're really fortunate in this county that there's just this little crew of people who have PCIT experience. 3 of us on the steering committee are trained as clinicians, but also serve in roles of leadership in some really key, important players in the county. So one of our trained PCIT clinicians also works at Mecklenburg County CDSA. I'm at a large community mental health agency, and we also have a trained PCIT clinician who came from our county's clinical and contractual services team, who works within our Department of Social Services. So that was really helpful. 2 of us have also served as senior leaders, myself and another representative who is at a nonprofit community mental health agency as well. We had Elizabeth from Smart Start, and we had Darden from the Center for Child and Family Health. So it was a team of people who really understood the nuances of PCIT, and also had experience with countywide initiatives, also understood, some of the barriers that are out there for serving our target population, which is Medicaid families in the Smart Start age range, so the 0 to 5 age range. But I want to just say that while we had kind of an embarrassment of riches in terms of people that were able to be on the steering committee, that's not going to be possible everywhere. And so I think what's really important to consider is joining together people in your community who have an understanding of the early childhood landscape, who represent, probably your county government level agencies, some nonprofit agencies, maybe even a public agency, for-profit in there if you wanted to go that route, someone from Smart Start. And ideally, you would really involve the Center for Child and Family Health in the planning, because I think that was a really crucial piece, as Elizabeth mentioned. It's a lot of these things are things that the Center for Child and Family Health often offers, and it's not always reciprocal. So we really entered into that as a partnership, wanting to learn from them and to gain from their expertise. And they also were very open to our recommendations, our insights, because we are the boots on the ground. We really understand the climate in our particular county. And that's why this is such a powerful partnership, because they have never before partnered with the county in this way. And I think what we were able to do as a steering committee was leverage our personal relationships to, really recruit a strong class of applicants. It's not to say that we showed favoritism. However, we as a group know a lot of people in mental health. And so we were able to reach out to those individuals. We were able to connect with agencies and connect with referral sources and partnerships, and to really recruit a good class of people who are going to strengthen PCIT in our county. We were also able to look at where their practices are geographically. Mecklenburg County is a huge county. I think if you drove from the top of Mecklenburg County to the bottom, it'd probably take you close to an hour at this point. Well, with traffic, maybe even longer than that.
For sure.
And so we were able to really strategically look at who was applying and where their practices were located, so that we can spread out access to this service. PCIT can be done really well over telehealth, and it's really, really powerful in person. And so we wanted to make sure that we were giving families around our county ease of access to those in-person services if we could. So
Mary
let's
Catherine,
see.
can I jump in just
Please.
to say with that, we're a county where when we mapped the services, like who is existing on the roster, they were all in the sort of what we call our uptown area, our downtown. And so for a county as large as ours, where public transportation is a challenge, we knew that's a barrier for families to be able to, to access the service. And so that was really, really critical. That, it was definitely on our checklist of things that we wanted to make sure, if possible, if we were looking at apples to apples, we wanted to include folks that were in those outer suburbs, to make sure that we were being sensitive to families and where they live.
I think the other piece of why this worked so well is because as a collective, we were able to really articulate what our guiding principles were and what our goal with this dissemination was. And so as we moved forward in that process, we did sometimes stray, as groups do, but we were always able to kind of recalibrate and get back on course. And I think a big part of that was the flexibility that the Center for Child and Family Health was able to give to us in terms of, you know, extending, we adjusted some of our deadlines. We adjusted some of our dates as we were doing the recruiting in the community and not getting initially as much interest as we hoped. And so there was really a lot of collaboration happening that allowed us to be successful, so that when we weren't getting what we wanted, or we weren't moving towards our goals in the way that we wanted to, we were able to be flexible with that. So that's not something that's always possible for them to do when they're doing a cohort with people from all over the state. And so that was a really unique, I think, aspect of doing it in the way that we did. I think that's the main points of what we wanted to cover.
The one other thing that I'll add is we are a community that is multicultural and international, and we have a large population of Spanish-speaking families. And so the other piece that we wanted in the mix, and something that the Center for Child and Family Health was you know, very hospitable to, was making sure that we had some bilingual clinicians in the mix. You know, that was our wish list, you know, and again, they were able to really be flexible with us and accommodate our wish list.
So one of the really unique aspects of this collaborative that we have going here in Mecklenburg County is this additional layer of secondary traumatic stress informed support. What we've been able to do is make a space for all of these clinicians and senior leaders to gather together outside of their consultation calls with the Center for Child and Family Health and outside of their training days. So we gather once a month. We're doing it kind of in rotation, where the senior leaders and clinicians all meet together 1 month, and then we'll do just senior leaders 1 month, just clinicians 1 month, and then all back together and kind of rotate throughout the year. The goal with this, you know, I think, as we're looking at this project that we took on, it's not just to get more clinicians trained in PCIT, it's really to strengthen parent-child interaction therapy within Mecklenburg County. And in order to do that, there really needs to be collaboration between different entities. And so what that looks like, you know, in real terms, is an agency like mine who's been doing PCIT for a while. We've had a wait list for, you know, the wait list varies in length, but we have had a wait list over the course of our 3 years of implementing this intervention. And so we're able to share referrals with some of these clinicians who are struggling to get them. And so we're really able to work together and viewing it not as my agency versus your agency, but really, how are we supporting the families in this county and getting this intervention out there? That's our goal. So this group has allowed us to kind of come together as almost like our own little agency, and to support each other with some really concrete things, such as a document share where we can share marketing tools, and a flyer that describes PCIT that you might give to families, and another flyer that you might use for your referral sources to make sure that you're getting quality referrals. We do something at each of these gatherings that we call crowdsourcing. So it's throwing out there, what is a barrier? What's a challenge that you have right now in front of you? And then really letting the group contribute to solving that, because it's not just me up there saying this is how you should do everything. It's really about bringing together people with lots of expertise and varying levels of knowledge about things like the MCO in the county and how we might get an enhanced rate and all of those kinds of things. Bringing together that knowledge into one pool is really helpful for everybody. So that's a big part of it. We also are using this secondary traumatic stress informed approach to really help with retaining these clinicians. As we've talked about, one of the things that's a challenge is getting the clinicians through training, but then also retaining them long after the training so that they can actually be executing the intervention for years to come. And so we're using the CSERT model, Components for Enhancing Clinician Engagement and Reducing Trauma. This is a model that you can get trained in. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. The University of Oklahoma does the training. I think there are multiple training entities. That's the one I attended. But this model, this approach really promotes integrating self-care throughout your day with micro interventions rather than this kind of after-hour self-care that a lot of us engage in. And so we're really trying to integrate that into this work. This is something that the Center for Child and Family Health has also integrated into their senior leader track as far as the STS information, but we're trying to take it a step further and just really give some tools to these senior leaders as well as to the clinicians so that they can, manage a lot of these stresses, the stresses of being a clinician, which is hard, taking on an evidence-based training, which is hard, and doing all of that in the midst of the world today, which is very hard. So this is I think this piece of the puzzle is something that's really going to enhance this experience for these groups. And I hope that it'll mean that we have a 100% graduation rate at the end of these clinicians making it through training. But that's a shorter term goal. My long-term goal with this is to really get a solid group of clinicians in the county that if I have a clinician on my team who's trained in PCIT and they leave, then we've got someone else that we can refer clients to and that we can work together and ensure that continuity of care for these families. Where we were a couple of years ago in Mecklenburg County was that, there were only a few of us, maybe 3 minutes. 3 minute. Darden just reminded us of our time. And I said minutes instead of clinicians. We had, maybe 3 clinicians in the whole county that were accepting Medicaid that were trained in this. And so there wasn't anywhere to send a family if we dropped out. So I think that's kind of the larger goal, is really making sure that we're supporting these families. I'm going to stop talking so we can make sure that we have time for questions.
And I'm just going to quickly tell everybody that the logic model that we created for Smart Start, because of course working with NCPC is a part of this. So that is in the documents that are available that support this. We created a budget. I'm happy to talk to anybody about the budget. And we were fortunate that we had, because of COVID, we had some reversion dollars that we were able to do this kind of one-time project with. Happy to talk through like contracting. If you want a copy of the COMBI, I'm happy to share that as well, but I'm going to be quiet so that there is time in case you guys have questions. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can actually see the chat. The other thing, Jessica reminded me, there are a lot of documents. It's a little bit of a kitchen sink, but there, I put in the some of the evidence that we use to document our problem. Because you want to be able to really have a solid understanding of what the need is, and so we've got all kinds of information in there about that. Do you have data on how many families actually completed all the recommended sessions? I think Brenda's talking about PCIT. Darden, do you know what the completion rate is for PCIT?
I think it varies from agency to agency, study to study, but by and large, PCIT's completion rate is pretty much exactly the same as community mental health completion rates in general. So we know that the dropout rate is really high in community mental health. PCIT is no different from that. According to the various studies, the dropout rate is anywhere from like 70% to 30%. So it just falls right in line with community mental health rates.
And I heard someone say this at a conference one time, that PCIT is a victim of its own success in many ways, that the reasons that we often have people drop out early in PCIT is because they've learned so many skills that their child's behavior has improved so much that they don't continue on to the second stage. So that happens quite often too, just to put in more of a plug for PCIT.
Yeah, we call it the CDI cure. People feel like they're fixed in the first half of the model and they don't keep going to the second half. PCIT can be done in the home setting, yes.
But it's most often done in a clinician's office where it's a little more of a controlled environment. And with, as Darden referred to, there's a bug in the ear that goes in the parent's ear, and there's a camera or a one-way or a two-way mirror that the clinician can see the parent and the child interacting, and then the clinician is talking to the parent in that bug in the ear.
Yeah, if I had to choose traditional in-home versus virtual also at this point, I would hands down choose virtual. It's much more similar to the in-office traditional setting. I think there was another one. I need data for the ages. I'm not exactly sure, Brenda, what you're asking. There's a ton of PCIT data, and it's all relative to the 2.5 to 7 age range, because that's our PCIT age range.
I was talking about, do you have ages, like how many children have participated in Charlotte by age group?
Oh, I'm sure we could probably mine some of that data from our consultation. I don't know that that would be exactly the data for the whole city, because people are continuing to do it post-training. So I'm not sure I know the answer for that. I don't know if any of you guys do.
I don't think we have data that extends across the county, because of the fact that there have been very few providers until this cohort. And there hasn't really been a whole lot of cross-agency data collection. I do think that that's a great idea, though, and maybe something that we should think about doing throughout this year is kind of collecting some of that data from these different agencies. There was also a question about whether the teacher is ever included, and I'll let Darden maybe expand on this a little bit. So we use a data collection measure called the ECBI, which is the IBERG Child Behavior Inventory, at each session. There is a version of that called the SESBI, the Sutter-Iberg Behavior Inventory, which is used in the classroom setting. So teachers, there are ways to do PCIT in a classroom setting or with teachers. It's not done. I haven't heard of it really done very often, partially because the behavior interventions that you're learning are not then probably going to be generalized at home. I think if you could figure out a way to train a teacher on these skills and also to include the family, that would be amazingly impactful. We do have a non-clinical intervention of PCIT called CARE, which is Child-Adult Relationship Enhancement. That is a very useful training for teachers because it gives some of the basic PCIT skills, but it's kind of packaged in a 4-hour workshop that you can do and apply to any setting for anybody who interacts with children. Darden, I'm going to let you also answer if there's anything I left out.
Yeah, so no, that's a great response. And I also just put the link in the chat for our training through CCFH, and it has information about PCIT and CARE, which Mary Catherine was just talking about. So yes, we do not typically include teachers as caregivers, primary care caregivers for these kiddos. We're working specifically with the caregivers who have them in their homes, and we expect that behavior change is going to generalize through the classroom setting. It's pretty typical for clinicians to work with teachers to help them kind of understand what we're doing, and even sometimes help create space to teach them some of the skills that we're using. We have handouts in the PCIT International materials for teachers to use that we often share. Like Mary Catherine was talking about, there is the measure that we have specifically for teachers. There is actually teacher-child interaction therapy. We do not have that available to train here. That is something I personally would really love to bring to the state of North Carolina, but I need funding to do so. Anyways, that exists, but it's not something that exists here and right now, and it's not trained as widely as PCIT is, but we work one-on-one typically with teachers as needed. And then CARE is a beautiful resource that is similar, and it teaches lots of similar skills and is more easily accessible.
I will put a huge plug in for CARE. Sorry about the reverb there. We just did a CARE training for our partners actually last week, and the feedback was tremendous. I think that they left with some really practical things that they could go back and put into place, immediately in their classroom. So, I'm a big fan, and I'd be glad to connect you with some trainers of care if you are interested. Have you seen families change clinicians much with PCIT to find a better fit, or are there not enough clinicians for that kind of choice?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I don't think there's really enough clinicians historically in the community. I mean, we're talking, I think we had like 6 for the whole area. And so like it was, if you wanted this, a portion of them were they took no insurance. It was private pay only. So there really was not a lot of choice.
I haven't experienced, I mean, within our agency, there has not been a lot of that. I would say the main reasons that people would request one clinician over another is just their availability. So, but I do think that that's something that could start happening as we grow our numbers. And we've done a little bit of that for families who need Saturday appointments. For example, we might refer them to one of our colleagues in this cohort who offer those services. So it is useful for that.
And in the meantime, we spend a lot of time in training talking about engagement and how to meet clients where they are and all of those good things relative to PCIT specifically. So we're hoping to be able to help maintain those relationships in PCIT.
I know that we've gone way, way, way over. Our emails are on the last slide of the deck that we were just using, the PowerPoint deck. I want to encourage all of you to feel free to reach out to us via email. Maybe folks can also put their email in the chat if you want to as well. We really appreciate the opportunity to share this. As you can tell, we're really excited about this project, and we look forward to really making a big difference for children and families in our community. So,
yeah, and I'm just going to reiterate one thing that Mary Catherine said. We do currently have applications open for our next training cohort, cohort 19. Also, if you're interested in engaging in more of a area geographically specific or county specific training contract, you would just contact me to start to talk about those options in any way, shape, or form. So I put my email in the chat. The link that you have would also get you to me via the website. So just reach out if you have questions about PCIT generally or training, anything like that. We're happy to help when we can.
all right, Jessica, turning it back over to you.
All right, thank you all for attending this session. It was a wonderful session, a lot of engagement. So I appreciate all the speakers for your wonderful content and expertise. Before we end this session, I just wanted to lift up that we do have a survey for this session. It will include all the sessions for the full day. So please consider taking the survey at the end of the day and providing your feedback to this team. Additionally, our next session starts at 11:45. It's a 30-minute sponsorship session from All About Books. So please consider attending that session. And additionally, I want to lift up that we do have a sponsorship. One of our sponsors, Lakeshore Early Learning, provided different prizes, and the prize that they have to give out for this session is a pop and play sensory dimple, and so it is an early childhood toy and learning tool, and the winner is Angela Artis. And so Angela, I believe I have your email, but if you'd like to just send it to me in the chat, I can make sure that we can connect with you for your address to send that to you. So thank you all so much. I thank you all for attending the Smart Start Conference, and for the presenters, thank you for being here today and giving us this wonderful content.
Sorry, guys, I got to run. I'm late to my consultation call. See you later.
So we do not have CEU certificates, but we do have